Hello, everyone, and this is still your professor, Mr. Krippe Anthony A. Ramos. And for this session, we will be talking about global administrative reforms and transformation of governance and public administration. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, of course, no, since we are to talk about global administrative reforms, it is important for us, no, syempre to define what is reform muna, no. So syempre in terms of reformation, pwede mo rin natin ma-associate yung term na reorganization, but we will be talking about this no in a bit. So let's start first and focus first with the term reform. So it has been said that reform refers to intended or designed changes into established or routine ways of life, of the ways organizations perform, of governance, administration, and management. So again, if we're dealing with reform, we would want to change, of course, kung ano nga ba yung nakagisnan. That status quo na meron po tayo, ang ninanais po netong reform is that, syempre meron tayong ini-intend na palitan, o kung di naman kaya palitan, ay baguhin. Okay, so that's the first definition. It can also be said that reform may be profound fundamental alteration of the existing order, or it may simply be a surgical alteration in the system of organization and administration, government, and politics. Third will be a reform with fundamental changes may at the ultimate level invoke radical changes with significant transformation of a system and as such can produce revolutionary alteration of the existing order considered no longer desirable or acceptable. So again, since ang mundo nga po ay nagbabago and of course situations are changing, it is also ano po no, it's also hindi naman natin may pagkakaila na itong mga bagay na ito ay yung mga nakagisnan natin before or mga binibigyan natin ng pansin or binibigyan natin ng halaga before may also actually change, no? And with that being said, kung hindi na dinidesire, no, say for example ng mga nanunungkulan or say for example ng mga tao, yung nangyayari, pwedeng-pwede po nila itong mapalitan or mabago and that can actually be associated with the term reform. And of course, most revolutionary changes demand popularly expected radical reforms or alteration in the system that are no longer legitimate or acceptable, no? So ito nga lang yung medyo ano no, isang usapin na medyo controversial no when it comes to changes. Siyempre, if you are to change no yung system na and there are some groups or people na ang kanila pong ano no, ang kanila pong pamamaraan ay siyempre radical reforms. And with that being said, hindi rin natin makakaila na itong mga reforms na ito can actually ano po no involve yung ito nga po no yung radical reforms and alteration which can actually be ano po no which can actually be termed doon sa system na hindi na po legitimate or acceptable. All right, let's continue with the purposes of surgical reforms. Okay, so the first one would be, of course, the system preservation and enhancement as well as reform for the sake of reform. Example of which will be the Shah's reform sa Iran no, na nangyari noong 1960s. Second will be your improvement in the administrative and system capacities. Example will be the most ongoing reforms sa governance and of course in organizational operations pagdating sa business and even sa public administration, including some of the reforms ng post-revolutionary situations at saka yung managerial reforms na nagaganap sa United States. And of course, we have simply following the trend of reform as done by many organizations. All right, so just like what I've mentioned earlier, if we are dealing with changes, no, syempre yung unang term will be your reform, and of course, we also have what we call as the reorganization. So if we are to define reorganization, this refers to structural arrangement, reconfiguration, reordering, and reformation. So ibig sabihin, meron ka lang babaguhin, doon po it's either sa kanyang arrangement, sa kanyang configuration, sa kanyang order, no, at kahit halimbawa dun sa reformation nga po, no. So yan yung unang definition of reorganization. The second one will be rescuing of an otherwise disorganized and chaotic system, government, organization, and administration. No, it's also been said that it's a way of bringing in a new structure, your new organization, or even a new order. So uh, in simpler terms, if we are dealing with ano po no with new structure, new organization, and new order, that is the concept of reorganization. And the third meaning can actually be no it can refer to the rules, procedures, and regulations that govern the processes and functions of a system of government, your organization, administration, and management. So hence, if we are to describe this, this is the structuration by the design. Now, since we are able or we were able already to define yung reform and your reorganization, may nabanggit din kanina dyan, ano, yung tatawag natin na structural reconfiguration. So if we're dealing with your structural reconfiguration, it simply means that there will be rearranging and resorting the functions, responsibilities, rights, and duties of your government and public administration in the management of your economy, society, and politics, both domestically and internationally. So simply put, meron na daw tayong ano no, meron daw po tayong structure, meron na tayong mga functions, meron na tayong mga responsibilities na ilatag na po lahat-lahat. Ang gagawin na lamang po diyan ay magkakaroon po ng pagre-resort or pag-rearrange nitong mga bagay na ito so that applicable na ito sa mga usapin. Halimbawa, no, kasi syempre, as I've mentioned, nagbabago ang ating lipunan, nagbabago ang mga sitwasyon no, from time to time. So with that being said, no, syempre kailangan natin mag-adapt to these changes. At kung magkakaroon ng structural reconfiguration, we will be needing to rearrange and resort yung mga nabanggit natin kanina. And again, the application of which must be both domestic and of course international. Kasi nga yung sitwasyon natin ay hindi lang naman na hihinto dito sa ating bansa, bagkus kasama rin daw po yung ating pong international community. Now, if we are to deal with the administrative reforms, it has been said that it reflects the nature of leadership decisions, the content or substance of reforms, target populations or recipients of reforms, your mode of operation can also be part of it, and of course, yung organizational arrangements for implementation, budgetary issues or funding the reforms, your leadership support, continuity or disruptions in the reform programs and politics, as well as economics of reform. So simply put, lahat ng merong kinalaman sa administrasyon no, ng isang organization or ng isang institusyon kagaya ng ating gobyerno can be part of that no, yung administrative reform. So again, if we are dealing with the administrative reforms, tinitingnan natin lahat ng aspeto ng ng pamamahala at ng ating apong mga tinatawag na mga leadership aspects no. So with that, syempre titingnan mo yung iyong mga desisyon, titingnan mo kung ito nga ba yung ito nga ba yung ninanais natin or ng taong bayan, ito ba yung tinitingnan natin talaga as something na makapagbigay doon sa ating constituents ng ninanais po nila na mga bagay-bagay. So for example, kung ito ba ay ma-uplift ang general welfare kung tawagin daw po natin. That is your administrative reforms. Now, if we are dealing with administrative reforms, meron daw po tayong tatlo no na reforms na maaari po nating magamit. So una diyan ay tinatawag po na top-down reform. From the word itself, top-down, syempre you will be yung change o kaya yung reform na binabanggit diyan ay manggagaling muna sa taas or the top of leadership of an organization. So tinitignan diyan yung governing elites, no? Tinitignan diyan yung administrative at saka yung bureaucratic elites or leaders. Even say for example sa mga companies and sa ating mga organizations, yung executive managers o kaya yung tatawag na CEO, no? Tinitignan natin doon natin ginagawa yung reform at saka change pababa, no? So mula doon sa taas pababa, kaya siya tinawag na top-down reform. On the other hand, if we are dealing with the bottom-up reforms, ang nangyari naman po rito ay yung opposite po ng top-down. Kung saan, ayan yung ginagawa po rito is that nagkakaroon daw po ng pagbabago doon muna sa sa pinakababa. Say for example, sa mga organizations, yung mga rank and files natin kung tawagin, up until umabot na ito sa pinakamataas. Kaya siya tinawag na bottom-up. But yung panghuli ay tinatawag natin na institutional or hybrid reforms na kung saan ang nangyari po rito ay meron po tayong institutional approach sa pagbabago ng ating pong sistema. Na kung saan syempre ito yung ito yung tinatawag din na superior approach kasi ang ginagawa po nito ay lahat ng advantages ng top down at saka ng bottom up ay pinagsasama nila. Kaya nga siya tinawag na hybrid reforms. Again, when you say institutional or hybrid reforms, ito daw po yung tinatawag na superior approach when it comes to changes and reforms. Okay? Sige po. So let's go ahead and continue. So in dealing with globalization and global reforms, syempre no na ang pinakamalaking nangyari na structural reform ay nung ano no nung nung post World War II na kung saan nagkakaroon ng nation building ang lahat ng mga bansa lalo lalo yung mga naapektuhan ng giyera no. Syempre nangyari diyan yung mga pagbabago rin na brought about by the necessity of time kung tawagin nga, yun yung post-colonialism and national independence movements na kung saan wala nang may gustong magpasakop, no? So it has also been said that the world was divided and also where the theories of development, governance, and public administration equally divided din daw po, no? So in terms of your globalization and global reform. So with that, syempre nagkaroon ng global reforms, isa sa mga hindi po naiwasan ay yung tinatawag po natin na privatization reforms, no? So sa pagbabago at pagbangon daw ng mga iba't ibang mga bansa, ito daw po yung naging trend nung mga panahon, no? So itong privatization reforms na to ay meron pong tatlong forms, namely your tactical privatization, your pragmatic privatization, and of course the systemic privatization. So let's discuss this one by one. When you say tactical privatization, syempre ang nangyayari diyan ay ano no na kung sa ang nangyayari po diyan ay lahat daw po no ng ng sistema or ng ano no ng pamamahala doon sa isang organization or say for example sa isa pong company ay ginagawa po ng private or non-profit organizations. Okay? So hindi maikakaila na itong tactical privatization ay actually hindi ito bagong ideya kasi lahat ng mga ano no lahat ng mga gobyerno worldwide no from local to national levels ay ginagamit na nila po ito no. So again, what tactical privatization aims that the things no na ginagawa po ng mga bansa ay nagagawa po ng private or non-profit organizations. That is your tactical privatization. On the other hand, if we are dealing with pragmatic privatization, it is being applied to areas in which governments decide where and what areas to privatize on pragmatic grounds. And of course, if you are dealing with pragmatic privatization, tinitignan natin yung mga rason ng efficiency, effectiveness, and even your economy. So sa mga ganitong sitwasyon, binibigyan ng priority yung policy at saka yung performance daw po nung organization. That is your pragmatic privatization. So last is what we call as the systemic privatization. So in all the privatization reforms, this is considered to be the most comprehensive form of privatization. So syempre meron itong profound structural changes doon sa governance and administration. So with this, syempre nagkakaroon daw tayo ng structural reorganization ng governance administration at saka nilalapat nito yung tinatawag po na new public management philosophy na kung saan ito yung naging intellectual arm ng tinatawag po natin na corporate globalization. Sila po ang nagiging engine ng globalization sa isang corporate culture. So again, those are your privatization reforms. Those are your tactical privatization, pragmatic privatization, and the systemic privatization. All right. So before we end, I'm curious if what is your key takeaway from this lesson, and I'm expecting that you will be leaving your comment below sa ating comment box so that I'll know kung ano nga po ba ang natutunan nila for this session. And that's it for our discussion about global administrative reforms and transformation of governance and public administration. And I just want to grab this opportunity to thank everyone for attending our session, and I hope to see you all on the succeeding ones. Again, thank you very much, and hope to see you on our next session.